Charles Manson, 36, chose a house at random, tied up the family at gunpoint, then ordered his followers to go inside and commit ritual slaughter.
Feelings towards everything. I feel no bad. I know no bad. Open them. I'm not against you. Huh?
Are you bitter?
Bitter? No. No.
I have a question. Are you guilty of any murders? Are you guilty of plotting any murders?
I killed a chicken once.
Any human beings?
No, no.
You're absolutely innocent of any conspiracy to commit murder or telling anyone to commit murder or planning it?
I'll plead guilty to the Indians.
All right, I am DJ York with the DJ Talks podcast. I talk a lot, but I don't gossip, all right? I have a very special guest today. He is a very, I think, a very key figure of the Manson trial. He was the last visitor of Cielo Drive on the night of August 9th, so I'm not going to get too much into that. This is Mr. Dennis Hearst. Mr. Hearst?
Hi, Dennis. Happy to be here.
Yes, sir. I'm very happy to have you. Very happy. We had a 2-hour discussion last Saturday before, so y'all don't even get the big stuff.
Well, I do talk a lot, so we'll try and keep it away from gossip. What would you like to know?
Well, let's talk about where you're born. I mean, your a little bit of your family's history and what it was like. I mean, if I'm not wrong, growing up in Beverly Hills.
All right, so I was born August 8th, 1951, so it was my 18th birthday, the night of the Sharon Tate murders. One of 4 boys, and my parents, who had been avid cyclists, and my grandfather and his brother, who had from San Francisco, but had been professional racers in Europe. When they returned from their racing career in Europe in the mid-1920s, my grandfather opened up a bicycle store in San Francisco, and his brother opened up a bicycle store in this new town being built near Los Angeles called Beverly Hills. So in the late 20s. And after my dad returned from World War II, where he'd been a pilot in the Army Air Corps, he was very mechanical. He was also into bicycle racing and bicycle riding, as was my mother. That's how they met. And my mother's uncle and his wife, who were childless, were 60 years old, wanted to start retiring and traveling more. So they invited my mom and dad to come down and manage the bicycle store business. And since they didn't have any children, the family would eventually inherit the bicycle business.
All right.
And it was very well promoted, very well equipped bicycle store. It sold really fine European bicycles, along with Schwinn, the very rugged and reliable, popular Schwinn bicycles. But it was called Hans Ort lightweight bicycles. And that was a tribute to the fact that they specialized in lightweight European 10-speed custom type bicycles, and not just sort of the beach cruisers or the 1950s American bicycles that tended to be rugged, but not very high performance. So it was a very successful bicycle store and had a very interesting clientele. And we lived about 5 miles away from the bicycle store up Benedict Canyon. So the Sharon Tate residence, we would drive past Cielo Drive, or Angelo Drive, 2, 3, 4 times a day, going into Beverly Hills and back. And my dad would often ride his bicycle to and from the store. And we also had a delivery van. And so my older brothers, when they turned 16, they went from fixing flat tires and polishing bicycles and sweeping the shop to making deliveries. And when I turned 16, the same thing. The delivery van was sort of our teenage vehicle, but we also had some delivery duties. So I had a number of years until I went away to college, delivering bicycles in the delivery van. So it was a relatively modest middle class upbringing. My parents owning a retail store, but it was a very interesting place to grow up at a very interesting time. Our neighborhood was more modest than the major part of Beverly Hills where the big mansions were. And so there were a lot of either up-and-coming stars or not quite A-list stars. But on the 2 or 3 blocks that constituted our neighborhood up in the canyon, Gene Barry was lived right near us, and his son Freddie was one of my best friends growing up. Ray Walston lived right across the street. Bill Cosby lived in the neighborhood for a while before he made it big. Fess Parker of the Disney's Davy Crockett series lived on the street. And right across from him was a good friend of the family's, Buddy Ebsen. And in my grammar school class, kindergarten through 8th grade, so for 9 years, was Dean Martin Jr., Dino Martin, and Lucy Arnaz. Desi Arnaz was the class behind me. They formed a rock group that really started at a talent show at our grammar school with 3 kids from my class and Desi from the year behind us. And 3 of them went on, Dino, Desi, and Billy, and I think they had 3 or 4 or 5 pop hits, partly on name recognition and partly on, you know, some really fun pop music. And so if you're at a PTA meeting or a parent night at school and I'm showing my mom and dad my desk and everything else, some of the other mothers would be Lucille Ball, maybe Dean Martin. It was pretty interesting. Danny Thomas, because his daughter Marla was in my brother's class. So in my class or in my brother's class, there was quite a list of people who your listeners would probably recognize. And the bicycle store itself, the most famous street in Beverly Hills now is Rodeo Drive. And the street just to the west of Rodeo Drive, parallel to it, 1 block over, is Camden. So the bicycle store was at the corner of Camden and what we call Little Santa Monica, South Santa Monica Boulevard today. And so the clientele of the bike shop was a very interesting mix. It was really the only bike shop in Beverly Hills, so it was a pretty interesting mix of clients. I tell people the story that one of our favorite customers was Jimmy Durante, really very nice man, lived about 3 or 4 blocks away from the bicycle store. And he always paid with $100 bills. That was kind of his trademark. So if they sold him something that cost $96, he paid with a $100 bill. We got luckier if he bought something for $108 because he'd give us 2 $100 bills. And I delivered bicycles to his house for his grandkids a couple of times. And a lot of people were customers. I think I talk about sort of the young up-and-coming movie star set that had gotten into motorcycles and automobile racing. So Paul Newman, not maybe one of the younger ones, but Steve McQueen and David McCallum and James Garner and all those guys. And they would buy cycling shoes, bicycle racing shoes for driving the race cars because they had they're well engineered for working the pedals. And yeah, it was a lot of, I don't know if I told you this story, but I remember one day being in the bike shop. So when I was young, I'd polish fenders and dust and sweep and stuff. And into the bike shop, and the front door of the bike shop was right at 45 degrees. It was right at the corner of the major boulevard and Camden. But there was also a back entrance that went to the parking lot and the warehouse where we stored things and stuff. And that went through the shop. We didn't want customers going through the mechanic area or the shop, but if somebody was a really good customer or friend of the store, they sort of had shop entrance privileges. So into the store one day, through the back door, the mechanic's entrance, comes Buddy Hackett, famous comedian. And he says, Mr. Hearst, my best friend, he's just having a baby. Way too late in life for having his first baby, but he's having this baby. I've been to go to the hospital and visit him. And so do you have something I can give him for, and my dad said, well, this is a bicycle store. So, well, we have some tricycles, some very finely built European high quality tricycles. And he says, yeah, I'll take one of those. So my dad gets the tricycle and says, is it a boy or a girl? And he puts the puts a pink bow on the tricycle, and Buddy Hackett walks out with a tricycle under his arm. Well, by coincidence, I was at the store, I don't know, several weeks later, and into the front door of the store comes a guy with a tricycle under his arm and a pink bow on it, and it's Don Rickles. And he goes, Mr. Hearst, my idiot buddy, he buys me this tricycle. My kid can't ride it for 4 years. What am I going to do? My dad says, doing this transaction by coincidence in through the mechanics entrance, the back shop. Guess who walks in? Buddy Hackett. He goes, what are you're returning my gift? And they started this kibitzing back and forth between these two famous comedians, insulting each other and tearing at each other. And you could tell they loved each other. These guys were really good friends. And they just went into this routine that you would have paid money to watch it on a show in Vegas. I was laughing so hard I had to sit down. The whole store was cracking up. And but there were stories like that. Barbra Streisand coming up and parking her big Cadillac Eldorado convertible, and my dad saying, Miss Streisand, you can't park there unless you're going into the bike store. She goes, oh, I'm just going to the bank across the street. I'll only be here a minute. And he said, yeah, the car will be gone by the time you get back. And so there were people that were rude and, sort of.
I bet you didn't like that very much, knowing Mrs. Streisand.
Yeah.
The stories I've heard.
And parking was always a problem. And so they gave my dad a pith helmet and a whistle and some white gloves. Engraved on the whistle was keep him rolling, because he was always directing traffic. But it was a really interesting clientele, and you sort of took it for granted in some ways. But in other ways, we knew that we were living in Buddy Ebsen about this time was doing the Beverly Hillbillies. And so we knew that we were living in one of the most affluent communities in the country, a lot of celebrities. I think I told you the story that my mom was president of the PTA in our grammar school, Beverly Hills Catholic School.
Right.
Big fundraiser every year was a big dinner dance. Men would wear suits or tuxedos, and there was a band and entertainment and sit-down dinner. And that was the main fundraiser every year for the school. And it was at the Beverly Hills Hotel, which people might know from the movie Pretty Woman, but even back then it was the premier hotel, along with the Beverly Hills Hotel. And Hernando Courtwright, who owned the hotel, was a parishioner, so he donated it. And my mom would line up entertainment, and it was usually, almost always, a parishioner. So Lucille Ball one year, Dean Martin another year, Bob Newhart another year, Tim Conway another year. And so these were parishioners that would come in and entertain at the fundraiser. So we knew it was unusual, but just the way we grew up.
That's amazing. You grew up in what I think personally was the most cleanest and purest Hollywood film time. Does that make any sense? I think the 50s and 60s, I mean, there wasn't much nudity. I don't think any cussing, if any. It was late 60s. But it's just my favorite. That's what I'll watch. I mean, if I ever watch a movie, I mean, it's from the 60s or the 50s. Everybody thinks I'm weird because I'm a 19-year-old that watches black and white films. So it's
yeah, but it was also a time, Dennis, of transition. Music had been sort of the Beatles, which some people thought was radical because they had long hair. But you look back on the Beatles from at least the first, 64 to 68, 67. It was pretty pop music. And the music got, 68, 69, 70. It made reference to drugs. It became more risque.
Right.
And that was a transition. There was the hippies who were like peace, love, but then there was a dark side of the hippies. There were, and not just the Charles Manson hippie cult, but there were other instances of people that were protesting the war, but things became violent. There was sort of a.
I don't know if there's any. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you remember any of the outrage when John Lennon made the statement that we are quote unquote bigger than Jesus? Did you see any outrage in California?
Yeah, there was outrage by some, other people saying, well, if you measured by, how many minutes a day people listen to Beatles music versus study the Bible or go to church or whatever, he's making a social statement, but it was a social statement that was, at least with half the people, outrageous or unpopular. And there was also a transition because in July of that year, this is, I guess, 3 weeks, was it July 21st? 2 weeks, was Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Mike Collins on the moon. And that was a time of American and worldwide, joy at an accomplishment of mankind. But there was also the Vietnam War, which was probably never popular, was becoming quite controversial. So it was a time of transition from the 60s, where the music was the Beach Boys and surfing and sort of pop, and then getting into more psychedelic or drug referenced music.
Right, and so sorry, I mute my mic so I can make sure you get more of your stuff over because mine don't matter that much. But see, I've studied the '60s, and like I said, I'm a big Christian. I'm a preacher. I've seen in the '60s where America really went downhill with the music, the movies, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I want to say it's pretty factual. It all came from Europe, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and so on. And not before we get on the subject, Roman Polanski himself was from Europe and the movies that he made.
Yeah, and a lot of the movies that were really, really popular when I was in grammar school or even in high school, The Sound of Music, pretty wholesome movie. And the night in question, that August 8th, my 18th birthday, I took my girlfriend out to a movie, and it was Paint Your Wagon, another sort of Broadway musical with Clint Eastwood and Ray Walston, my favorite Martian, who lived right across the street. But movies were beginning to change as well.
Sorry, I had to unmute my mic. I really got to do better at that thing. But, it's crazy that you were around those people and whatnot. It's because, all those people by now, are, probably dead and gone. You were young. You were very young at the time. You were my age. I'm 19 now. And it's just crazy because the movie stars that, your generation loved and watched are all gone now. And you grew up around them. They were your friends. They were, your parents. Could you please tell the story of your birthday party, your 14th birthday party?
Oh, yeah. I've been to the beach, which we did growing up. It was kind of a surfer culture. And so whenever we had a weekend or the summers, we were always going to the beach. And so this was the summer between 8th grade and high school. And I'd come home from the beach, which is about 12 miles away, 10 miles away, and to the bike shop, and to get a ride home up the canyon with my dad in the delivery van. And he said, oh, we have to make a stop first, and you have to deliver a package. So we were going up, we usually go up Camden or Bedford. This time we're going up Roxbury, one block over. And we pulled up, and there's a neighborhood. Jack Benny lived at one house. Lucille Ball lived at the house next door to that. Jimmy Stewart lived in the house right across the street from that on a
crazy
double lot. He had that famous garden that he would bring vegetables around to the neighbors. And so my dad pulled up in front of the Lucille Ball's house, and he said, oh, yeah, would you take this package to the front door? So I got out, rang the front doorbell, and Lucille Ball answers the door. I've got this package, and I handed it to her, and she said, oh, come with me. And we walked through the house and out to the back where there was a big backyard, swimming pool, a pool house, and everything else. And as we walked out into the pool area, all of my friends jumped out and said, surprise, happy birthday. So that was, 4 years earlier, the night of my birthday. And it was a big party. They had, music and dancing and everything else. And so, yeah, it was an interesting place to grow up.
You had your 14th birthday party at Lucille Ball's house. I mean, that's boom. I mean, it's if you. I mean, I heard things about Lucille Ball. I mean, in real life, I heard she didn't play. Like she was a very strict, down to business person. Is that true, or were you not around her that much to see that side?
I was not around enough to see that side. By that time, she was married to Gary Morton, who was, I think, a producer.
Right.
And I don't never heard any stories about somebody acting up or running around or whatever. And but I didn't know her well enough. Lucy was in my class for most of the 9 years from kindergarten through 8th grade. You wouldn't have, if you didn't know her last name, you wouldn't have thought her any different than everybody else in the class.
Now, did the right? All right. So, did any of these celebrities in your class get special treatment, or not really?
No, not really.
Not really. See,
No,
that's
I don't.
you grew up at such a time. I mean, you grew up in such an area where it's like nobody like if you. I thought about it the other day. How's this guy meet people? Hi, I'm Dennis Hearst. Yeah, I went to school with these celebrities. I was the last person at the Manson house. You know, how are you doing? Do you like? Have you ever met people and made new friends? And you just sit around one night, all hanging out, be like, yeah. So I was there that night. You know.
Yeah, sometimes I'll be speaking to attorneys. I work with attorneys a lot in my line of work, and somebody will make some kind of comment about a trial or something in the legal profession or something like that. And if I want to stimulate conversation, I might say, well, my first interface with the legal system was I testified at the Charles Manson murder trial. And that usually gets a lot of people going. And it almost doesn't matter the generation. These people could be in their 60s or 70s, they could be in their 40s or 50s, or they could be in their 20s. And maybe somebody will, surprisingly often, will bring up something about Charles Manson or the murders or something like that. And sometimes I won't say anything, but sometimes if we want to sort of stimulate conversation, I'll mention that. Oh, I was the last person to leave the Sharon Tate residence alive that night, other than the perps. And that usually gets people going. And I'm surprised at how many people your age, Dennis, and halfway between your age and my age, still have a fascination with what happened.
Right. And I think that's where we're moving on to now. At this, we're 20 minutes in, and I would say the last 30 minutes in this podcast is we're going to be explaining Charles Manson, Sharon Tate, Ted Watson, and of course, Mr. Hearst, your story. I mean, you are. I know you said that I think you're a very key part. I mean, if you were not at Cielo Drive, the night of August 9th on 1969, they would not have had a time frame to match where Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, Tex Watson have gotten there. And I want you to explain that to my platform too, how they'll understand. You know what I'm talking about when we get to that. But I know you said with my generation how we're still thinking about this is it don't make any sense. It don't make sense how a small man, a little man. I got this book right here, which you know I'm sending to you. A little man, as you can see, look. I mean, even in the picture, look at the size. You know, a little man, Charles Manson, can take all of these young, half decent adults and make them go commit the most brutal, horrendous acts in American history. I mean, really, I believe it is. I mean, it's so sad. I mean, we're talking about a very beautiful actress, a very young actress, 9 months pregnant. I mean, Abigail Folger, a very young lady. I mean, Leno, Bianca, and them. I mean, parents. I mean, it's horrendous. It's dark, and still, what was this month, the 55th anniversary, is still darkens the people's minds.
Yeah, so let me preface it by saying, Dennis, I'm probably not a key player, but that may be part of what brought us together, because the people that were more involved were probably reluctant to speak about it to you, right, or podcasters or interviewers or or whatever. I got a call from, was it E Entertainment, to do they were doing it came out, you probably saw it. It was a documentary on the Charles Manson. And so they asked if they could, but they wanted to do it in a studio with lighting and sound and everything else. So they wanted to know when I'd be up in Los Angeles next. And we had a couple of dates that didn't work out. And so they went without it. So I wasn't a key player, but probably just peripheral enough, Dennis, where it's not a disturbing subject for me. I didn't know the people well. I didn't see the bodies and everything else. I was just part of the story. So I don't really have the same hesitation or brings up bad memories to talk about it. But here it goes. So it was my 18th birthday, and we were all at the beach, me and my friends. And this was the summer between high school and college. And I came home from the beach. And back then we would either hitchhike or take the bus or some combination of the two. And I got to the bike shop and I said, hey, Dad, it's my birthday. And I wanted to take my girlfriend, Janice, out for a date to a movie. She lived out in Brentwood on Rockingham, same street that where the O.J. Simpson lived. And so my dad said, sure, and you could borrow the van and I'll ride my bike home. But you have to make a delivery. And you can't make a delivery on your way up the canyon, say at 5 or 5:30, but you're gonna have to make it on your way out to Brentwood later in the evening, because they said they were gonna be out to dinner and they wouldn't be back till 7:30. So I had to deliver the bicycle sometime after 7:30. So not on my way up the canyon where we drove past, but on my way past it again on the way back down the canyon. And I said, great. So Abigail Folger and her Polish boyfriend, Wojciech Frutowski, had been in the bike shop the Wednesday before, so 2 days before, and had bought a nice bicycle. It's a British Raleigh bicycle.
Now, were you in the bike shop when they came and purchased that?
And my dad delivered the bicycle that evening on his way home, that Wednesday night. And then on Friday, my dad got a call and they said, we wanted the green bike, not the blue bike. I thought we bought the green one. And my dad said, sorry for the confusion, no problem. I'll switch out the two bicycles this evening. And that's when they said, well, you've got to come after 7:30, et cetera. So that's what I did. So probably around, it was after 7:30, it was before 8 o'clock, so call it 7:45. And my dad told me, he said, yeah, it's a little bit confusing to get there because it's Cielo Drive, but it's really off of Angelo, because it used to be a long private driveway up to this estate. And over the years, they subdivided the lots along the driveway, and there's a lot of homes there. So it was the Cielo Drive address, but it was actually off Angelo. And he said, yeah, just drive up to the gate and just feel around in the hedge bush there, and you'll feel a button. Just push that button, the gate will open. And my dad was familiar; he'd just been there 2 days before. And so that's what I did. I pushed the button, and then when I drove in, and I delivered a lot of bicycles to a lot of estates in Homey Hills and Beverly Hills and Bel Air. And often when you'd go through an electric gate, there would be a pressure plate, or like the gas stations in the old days with a black cord. You drive over it, it would go ding ding, but you drive over that and that would cause the gate to close behind you. So I looked all over the driveway for something to drive over, and there was nothing there. So I just drove around to the garage, got out the green bicycle, picked up the blue bicycle, strapped it in the van. Then I went around the driveway through it was like a split rail, rustic looking sort of farm or ranchy type fence. There was a little gate, a big front lawn with like a wishing well, flagstone steps, and around to the front door. It was a kind of a rambling ranch style house. So it had a big front porch, rang the doorbell. And Jay Sebring answered the door. And he had a green bottle in his hand, maybe something like a spaghetti or some kind of a alcohol or wine type of a drink in a green bottle. And we spoke for about 10 or 15 seconds. I said, I'm here to exchange the bicycle. He goes, the bicycle? I said, yeah, they bought a bicycle on Wednesday, wrong color. I'm exchanging it, whatever. He said, you need it? And I said, no, what? I picked up the other one. I dropped the other one off. It's in the garage right where the other bicycle was. And he said, okay, great, thanks, bye. That was it. And then I drove out to my girlfriend's house, picked her up. We went to a movie in Hollywood at the Cinema 21 Dome Theater, which is kind of a high-tech theater at the time. Saw Paint Your Wagon. And then, I don't know, 11 o'clock or 11:30, 11:45, we were driving back, and we were going west out Sunset Boulevard from Hollywood to Brentwood.
Right.
And as we approached the Beverly Hills Hotel, where Benedict Canyon leaves Sunset Boulevard, I said, you know, there was this really secluded place where I delivered a bicycle this evening. And if we wanted a place with some privacy for, I guess by today's standards, be pretty innocent kissing and necking and maybe some petting. We want some privacy. This would be a really private spot. And so I turned right on Benedict Canyon, and I'm going up Benedict for a block or two or three. And she says, you know, my dad trusts us and he gives us a lot of latitude in the family room at home. Let's just go back to my place. And I said, yeah, you're right. And it was a den that had a door, and so it was closed off, and he wouldn't bother us. And, you know, if it was midnight and it was time for his daughter's date to leave, he would walk outside the door and clear his throat. And if I didn't leave in 15 minutes, he'd come by the door again and, hey, I'm gonna microwave some popcorn. Meet me in the kitchen, but he gave us our privacy, which probably saved our lives. So after 3 blocks, I turned left and went down Roxbury back out to Sunset Boulevard, out to her house. And we had some time together that evening, and I drove home. And then the next day I was coming back out to her house. And as I was driving down Benedict Canyon, I always had the radio on in the car, listening to music of the 60s. But it was all interrupted by news about this multiple murders in Beverly Hills. I thought, oh my gosh, how horrible. And the information was spotty at first, but you know, it was 10 people or 5 people and whatever. And it didn't really register with me because it said Beverly Hills. And actually the Cielo address is just outside the Beverly Hills city limit. And even though the address might have been, you know, Cielo Drive, Beverly Hills, California, 90210, it was not actually in the city of Beverly Hills. Same thing with my address growing up was Beverly Hills, California, 90210, and they had zip codes. But we didn't actually live in Beverly Hills. So I didn't think anything of the night at all about the night before. But when I got out to Janice's house, she was waiting for me in the driveway. And she says, your dad wants you to call him right away. So I went inside, called my dad at the shop. I don't know, maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. And he said, did you hear the news about the murders? And I said, yeah. He said, do you know that that's the address where you delivered the bicycle last night? I said, no. And of course, we didn't know whether the murders occurred at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or, you know,
Right.
Maybe there was something going on while I was there. Maybe somebody said, oh, we better find that kid or whatever. Maybe I saw something. And so I said, well, what do we do? And he said, well, let's think about this. I said, well, what's there to think about? I'll call the Los Angeles Police Department, West LA, and I'll tell them that I was there. And he said, oh, I don't know about, and I said, Dad, I know you're my father, you want to protect me, but haven't you always told us to do the right thing? He said, yep, that's the right thing to do. You got to do it. So I got a sergeant on the phone, and I told him, I think I asked for whoever was working on the murder case. And he said, oh, I could take a message for him, whatever. So I spoke to this sergeant and gave him all my information, told him I was there about 8 o'clock. And if there was anything I could do to help, I just wanted to let him know. Never heard back from him. And then I went with 3 of my high school buddies for a big drive around California, from Southern California up to the Sierra Nevada, backpacking in the wilderness, on to Lake Tahoe, where some friends owned a private lake, water skiing, and then on to San Francisco. We wanted to see the hippies in Haight-Ashbury and camp out on Mount Tamalpais, and then drove down through the Big Sur and all the way down to Newport Beach, where another friend had a fantastic sailboat. We spent a couple of days sailing. But before I left my friend's house in Newport Beach, my dad knew that's where we were going to be at the end of our trip. He called and said, when are you coming home? And I said, tomorrow. And he said, what time? And I said, I got to drop everybody. I'll be at the shop about 11 o'clock. Is that okay? And he said, yeah, but come straight to the bike shop. Be sure you come to the bike shop. Didn't say anything else. So I get to the bike shop about 11 o'clock, and there's 2 gentlemen sitting in the sort of the waiting chair, the customer chairs. And my dad said, yeah, this is my son. And my dad said, these are Los Angeles police detectives, homicide detectives. And I said, oh, okay. And what had happened was, while I was gone on my trip, maybe a week or 2 after the murders, the detectives had come into the bike shop and they said, oh, we found this receipt at Sharon Tate's residence. And it indicates that Abigail Folger bought a bicycle here on Wednesday, 2 days before the murders. What did she look like? Who was she with? Did she look like she was under any stress, or, who else was with her? And they're asking all these questions. And at the end of that, my dad says, okay, well, that's interesting. You're asking me all these questions about Wednesday afternoon at the bike shop when you never called my son back, and he was there Friday night around 8 o'clock. And they go, what? So then they wanted to talk to me. So they took me across the street to where their plainclothes detective's car was parked. And they said, so you talked to Jay Sebring when you delivered the bicycle? And I said, yeah. And they said, oh, here, just for the record, here's a picture of Jay Sebring. That's who you talked to, right? And I said, no, that's not who I talked to. And they said, oh, sorry, we got it mixed up. They handed me another photo, and I said, no, that isn't talking to that guy either. And they said, okay, well, I'm sorry, there's confusion here. So they hand me a binder, and it's got like 6 photographs inside plastic protectors on a page. And they go, no. Oh, that's the guy I talked to. And they go, okay, that's Jay Sebring. We just wanted to make sure that you weren't making this up. It's probably very typical. And so then they asked me, and cut into the chase, because I had looked so carefully across the driveway when I came in for something to drive over to close the electric gate behind me. And there was nothing in the driveway, and I could swear to that. But when Winifred Chapman, the maid, arrived at the house at 7:30 or 8 o'clock the next morning and found the bodies, called the police, the phone cables had been cut. And when they cut, they fell across the driveway inside the gate. And so as they go to create the 24 hours or so before a crime or murder, they take the life of the victims and they move it in space and time, and then the storyline or the alibi or whatever of the suspects. And because, and I understood that the cutting of the phone line matched the striations of a pair of cable cutters that they found out at the Spawn Movie Ranch. Somebody recently told me that he didn't think that was actually the case, but that they found bolt cutters. I don't know if they forensically matched them or not. But a defense attorney could say, well, okay, so even if my clients possessed the cable cutters that cut the cables, they could have cut them 2 days before the murder, or the morning of before the murders, or Um, and so the fact that they were not cut at 8 o'clock when I left, and they were cut when the next person arrived at 8 o'clock the next morning, that means that it helps convince a jury that those actions that could be tied to the Tex Watson and the family members actually occurred very close to the time. And I think Steve Parent, who was the first person killed, as I understand the timeline.
He was your age, if I'm not wrong, 19 years old, and he was sitting in the car in the driveway.
Yeah, he was about a year older. I think he'd been there visiting Bill Garrettson, and he was leaving, I think about 10 or 10:15 in a white Rambler station wagon.
Right.
And so he was driving out as they were coming in. And so I think Tex Watson went up to him right off and shot him, and he was found shot behind the wheel of his car.
Was that car there when you were there?
No. So
Wow.
I think the cars that were there was the black Porsche that belonged to Jay Sebring, and then the Camaro that belonged to Sharon Tate. Those are the only. And I think, as I understood it, he didn't arrive until, I don't know, maybe 9 o'clock, and he was leaving at 10 o'clock, something like that. So that car wasn't there when I was there. He wasn't there when I was there.
Right.
And so it wasn't a big thing. It just was part of the overall picture. And I think some of the witnesses were, I don't know, maybe difficult or confused, or there was some credibility. Certainly not Winifred Chapman, and certainly not, I think it was the house painter or whatever. But we talked about this. Bill Garrettson, we're still not sure exactly what happened there. So the fact that I was willing to testify, that I had some element of information, that I was very precise, and could swear to it without any question. And so they scheduled me as a witness. And then one other interesting story was that morning, I think we were briefly in a room and we talked, and these were the people that were going to testify the first day of the trial. And it was Colonel Tate, Sharon Tate's father, Winifred Chapman, the maid, Bill Garrettson, who survived through all this out in the guest house on the other side of the pool.
Somehow.
The house painter, I can't remember his name, who had painted some windowsills that they found foot marks or handprints or whatever, and he had finished painting it like 4 or 5 in the afternoon. So that also helped. Anybody who made a footprint or a hand mark or whatever in that fresh paint didn't do it 2 days before or whatever. They had to have done it that evening.
Right.
And so we were, and then after that, before the trial started, we were lined up sitting in the hallway outside the courthouse, outside the courtroom. And we heard a little commotion at the end of the hallway, and it was like the sheriff or the bailiff saying, no, you can't come in here. And there was a little brief tussle, but it was a photographer, and he had leaned around the corner with his camera and snapped a picture.
Is that the photo that I have?
That is the photo that you have.
Wow.
And so after I testified, and Vince Bugliosi, the district attorney, did the direct. The famous obstructionist attorney, Irving Kanarick, did the cross examination. And then Stephen Kay, I think was the assistant DA, did the redirect.
It was still alive today.
Yeah. And of course, one of the defense attorneys, Hughes, I think, didn't even make it to the trial. They found his body out in the desert.
Right.
But Irving Kanarick, he had all these obtuse questions like, well, what did Jay Sebring, how did he act when you're with him? I said, well, he acted normally. And he said, well, what do you mean by normal? And I said, okay, well, you're asking the question, so what do you mean by normal? And he said, I'll ask the questions, you whatever. And I said, okay. He didn't look stressed. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look drunk. He didn't slur his words. He didn't, whatever. Everything that and then he would say, well, then you're saying that he only appeared normal to you as you perceived him. I said, oh, do you think I could perceive him some way other than how I perceived him? Or, you know, so I sort of enjoyed the verbal fisticuffs or whatever. He probably did too. I was clearly not friendly to the defense. I was a prosecution witness. And so while this is going on, I don't know, 20 feet away, is Charles Manson sitting there, staring at me, giving me the stink eye. It was kind of creepy. I tell people it was a little bit like Huck Finn sitting across from Injun Joe in the courtroom, if you're familiar with Mark Twain literature. And so that was kind of creepy. And of course, by then, this is a year later, so we'd heard all these terrible stories, and then the LaBianca murders, and the Gary Hinman murders, and Shorty Shea. But also, in some books I read, a beautiful young woman who was a microscope mate of mine. We took biology one summer, and I went to Uni High, which is near UCLA, West LA. And we had, I don't know, 20 kids in the class and 10 microscopes. So you had a microscope partner. Beautiful girl, Marina Habe. They found her murdered in her little sports car, like a little MG sports car up off of Sunset Boulevard. And I had read that Bugliosi felt that there were a number of murders, maybe a dozen or 24 other murders in the year or two around that period that could have been or likely were committed by the family. So it was all kind of creepy. And then as I'm leaving court that day, they paid for my parking, I think, which was like 50 cents. But my car was parked a few blocks away. So as I'm leaving the courthouse, I'm walking back towards the parking lot. I get a red light. So while I'm waiting for the light to change, there was a newsstand, and it had the evening or afternoon edition of the Los Angeles Times. You put a nickel or dime, whatever you put in at the time, and you could open it up and take out. I could take out 5, but you'd take out one newspaper, because I wanted to read the news, because the trial was a big thing. So as I'm looking at the front page, there's that picture, front page of the LA Times, above the fold, and I'm in there, and it says, what did it say, prosecution witness Dennis Hearst or something like that, and I'm thinking, ooh, it's kind of interesting. And then right about that time, I hear some hissing, and I'm looking around, and then I look over here across the street, and there's about 8 or 9 members of the family in their hippie clothes and everything else, and they're holding up the picture of the LA Times with my picture on it, and pointing at the picture, and then pointing at me and doing the hex. So that was a little bit creepy.
What in the world?
Yeah, then I get in my little Volkswagen Beetle and drive home, which is up Benedict Canyon, where we lived also in a secluded cul-de-sac, or half abandoned cul-de-sac, about 2 or 3 miles away from where the murders had occurred. So it was a little creepy at times, but as we talked about, when you're 18, 19, you're invulnerable,
Right.
Nothing's going to kill you. So it wasn't, I didn't have nightmares. It didn't change my pattern of, how I live my life or anything else. But one thing that we also talked about was, every once in a while, and maybe this is a vice, not a virtue, and maybe more than every once in a while, as I'm falling asleep or waking up or whatever, just do some daydreaming. And I go, if I could go back in time and know what I know then, what I know now, what would I do different? Obviously we know what stocks to buy or when a disaster was going to hit or something like that. And we could maybe achieve more of what our potential was that we didn't live up to, or we could make money knowing what was going to happen in the stocks and stuff. And so I always said, well, I would go back to high school, so I'd get some of my B's changed to A's. Instead of going to UCLA, I would have gone to Stanford, and that had to do with cycling. As you can tell, it's still a big part of my life. And I think 3 members of the 1976 U.S. Olympic team in cycling were from Stanford. And I thought, if I'd been at Stanford, I would have been a better biker. And I used to race against those guys, and I thought, well, that would have But one thing that always got in my way was, okay, so wait a second. So if I went back to high school, what would I have done the night of August 8th, 1969? I would have known the murders were going to occur. So what would I do? Like trip a fire alarm at 11 o'clock at night so that the fire trucks would be there when the Tex Watson pulled up with the girls in his car, or call the police department at 11:30 or whatever and say, oh, I think I heard shots. So maybe the police are coming up the street and the murderers would have been dissuaded from their act, and I would have saved some lives. And by not acting, just let the world turn without any influence, those people would have been killed.
Right.
Then I thought about it and I thought, well, wait a second. So if I did that, what if I read in the newspaper the next day, there was no murder on Cielo Drive, but there was a party of 12 people or 15 people that was killed 2 miles away. And I thought, wait a second, that would be that. So this moral dilemma that we talked about a little bit, Dennis, or like a fictitious moral dilemma. And then when the movie came out, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and of course Quentin Tarantino reenacts history perfectly accurate and then changes history, like Hitler being burned up in a Paris movie theater, and this studly stuntman, and there were a lot of Hollywood stuntmen that lived in our neighborhood. They were always really capable guys, and burns him with a flamethrower, and the murder is avoided. So my moral dilemma went away, and I could go back to my daydreams. But it wasn't very disturbing to me otherwise, and probably more available for people to talk to because it wasn't particularly traumatizing.
Right. Mr. Hearst, you have an amazing story. I mean, I think it is. I really do. I think a lot of people do. It was. I mean, I had to dig to find you. Everybody said, "How'd you find?" When I tell people about the interview, "How'd you find this guy?" I dug. I really did, and I'm glad that I did. I'm glad to have you on here for the last. I think about 5 more minutes, or maybe 10. About 5. I want to do some popcorn questions, and quick answers, and then as I do on every episode, just end it out with a prayer, and then we'll just end the show. Does that sound all good to you?
Sure.
Alrighty, so first question is, on the night of August 9th, 1969, when you pulled in August 8th. I'm getting Bianca.
I never get it wrong because it's my birthday, but
There you go. On August 8th, did you feel any weird presence? Did it seem off to you that night?
No.
Not one bit. Okay, when you on that same night when you talked to Jay Sebring, was there any? Did you hear Miss Tate? Did you see Miss Tate, or was it strictly Mr. Sebring?
He's the only person that I saw. And if somebody said he was the only person there, I would have had no reason to believe that. Or so he was the only person that I had any contact with that I saw or even saw off in the distance or whatever.
So it was definitely a very quiet, nice night in Cielo Drive house.
Well, I don't know.
I think that night it was, if I'm correct, inside the house, it was J. Sebring, Frukowski, Sharon Tate, and
Abigail Folger.
Abigail Folger. Yeah, it was a total of 4 people inside.
And the unborn baby. So.
And the unborn baby. Yeah, that's 5, really. And I've heard from Miss Ava Roosevelt. I've listened to her interviews. I have contacted her. We should maybe have something planned in 6 months, Lord willing. But she was supposed to be there that night. Sharon Tate's best friend. And the way she talks about it is Sharon described it as a party. But, you said it's very quiet. I mean, and they said that Sharon was in the room alone. I'm guessing it was just a get together, just a time with friends. Maybe Sharon needed, and I think this is scary to say, but maybe Sharon needed some security while Roman was out of town and being pregnant.
I don't know. It seemed like they were all pretty social and they were all good friends. So it wouldn't be unusual for them to go out to dinner together and then after dinner, come back to this. He was older and
relaxed,
a little bit rustic, but it was actually very, very nice home, nice estate. So for them to reconvene after dinner back at the house, that wouldn't be surprising.
Right. Now, you said that you heard a lot about Manson before you went into the courtroom. You had a year to hear all these stories, to see the newspapers. When you walked in and you first saw him, what was your first initial thought?
Well, okay, so remember, for most of that period of time, they had no idea who did the murders.
Right.
It wasn't until some events unfolded in a jailhouse and they started connecting the dots and stuff. So it was probably extra disturbing, certainly to our neighborhood or the the canyons in general, that these murders had occurred. The next night, other murders occurred, and they had no idea who the suspects were. But then when the arrests were made, there was article in the Los Angeles Times. There's probably an article every day about background or whatever, and there was pictures of Charles Manson, of course, in the newspapers. So when I get in the courtroom, it's not like I'm looking around saying, "Okay, well, I wonder which one's the defendant here." And so I'd heard stories, and he was weird, sinister, evil, macabre, and all those stories were out. And maybe some of it's the police or the prosecution wants everybody to understand why they're going to come down hard on this guy. But also remember, that was Charles Manson's trial, but Tex Watson was not on trial.
No.
He was extradited from Texas at a later date, and I came back a year later and had the very similar testimony at Tex Watson's trial.
Insane. Now, when you were in the courtroom, when you were in the courthouse itself, did you see firsthand Mrs. Van Houten, Susan Atkins, or Patricia Greenwinkle?
No. And if they were there, which I don't think they would have been, but my eyes were kind of fixed on this evil person that I've seen lots of pictures of. So that's when I did look up or look out. That's where my gaze would have been. I don't remember seeing in the audience or at the defense table anybody but the attorneys and Charles Manson.
And at the time that you went in and testified, took your stand, he did not have the X or the swastika, correct?
It's funny. If somebody had asked me some time ago, because I'd seen so many pictures that stick in your mind with the swastika carved and his head shaved, I might have said, "Oh yeah, it was really creepy. There was this guy." That was the first day of the trial. I don't think those events occurred until sometime later. I think it was during the trial, but not by the first day.
Right.
I can go back and look that up, but I don't think. And when I saw the Manson followers, cultists or whatever on the corner, and they were giving me looking at the newspaper, I imagined that, that's part of why they were so creepy. But again, I don't. Somebody pointed out to me that was not the case the first day of trial, and so over 55 years. But the rest of the facts, I remember calling probably 3 or 4 years ago on my birthday. I got a call from my old girlfriend, Janice. We still keep in touch. And I guess it was around the 50th, so 5 years ago. And she said, "Gosh, it's in the news again, and everybody's asking. It's been 50 years. I've told the story 300 times. Dennis, tell me what you remember, and let's compare notes, because I want to make sure that I'm remembering it the way you do and vice versa." And so we kind of went through the timeline, including turning on Benedict Canyon and going back off and everything else. And we were pretty comfortable that we remembered all those details correctly.
Wow. Mr. Hearst, we're getting to our time mark. I know that you have something scheduled here shortly. I cannot be more grateful that you came on here. Really, I couldn't be. Your story is amazing. I mean, especially to me. Like I said, I'm 19. I've been obsessed with this case since 2019, 2018, maybe even 2017. There's no telling. But I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we'll close out the show. Is that all right?
Sure.
All right. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just want to thank you for this day. Lord, I just pray that you wash away any sin, wickedness, or ungodliness off of me, Lord. But Lord, I want to thank you for the opportunity that you have given me, Lord, to interview Mr. Hearst, Lord, all the way from San Diego, California. God, I pray that you keep your hand on him and his life, God. Lord, thank you for letting us have this conversation, Lord, in this fellowship, Lord, and talk about this part of history, Lord, that a lot of people don't want to bring up, Lord. Lord, thank you for what you've done. Thank you for keeping us safe and keep your hand on us and our family, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Man.
Well, everybody, this was DJ Talks. This is the end of the show, and I want to thank you for tuning in. This is the story of Mr. Hearst, the last visitor of Cielo Drive. Thank you.
Thanks.